Well, it's crunch time at the Hawaii State Capitol with about a month to go in the legislative process. How have Governor Green's initiative fared this legislative session?
He is live in the studio to answer our questions and yours. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, thanks for tuning in here to Spotlight Now on Hawaii News Now. Joining us now live here in the studio is Governor Josh Green. Good morning, Governor, or good afternoon, I should say. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We want to, of course, invite all of you who are watching on home or online to submit your questions for the governor. You can head over to the Facebook page of Hawaii News Now and enter your comments and questions for the governor there, or you can scan this QR code to ask your questions. We'll be monitoring that throughout the show.
We want to start off, as we usually do, with our conversation on Maui and get the latest from you on numbers. We did see that you decided against doing the moratorium on vacation rentals in West Maui. Tell us a little bit about your thinking and what the figures look like to you.
Sure. So it was a purely analytical call. We had to have enough houses to transition people from hotels to longer-term rentals. I guess because of the combination of pressure and people's generosity, we got to that point. So as of right now, we are at, and I'll have to check my notes here, we are at 1,150 families that are still in the NCS, or the non-congregate sheltering, down from a peak of 3,071. So we're at 1,150. That represents 2,889 people. We have 1,331 available long-term rentals, plus, of course, we'll talk about this, a lot of housing coming online soon, kind of the more permanent housing. So we reached the point where we had enough overall. Now, do we have enough directly in Maui to make everyone, give everyone the ability to stay in Maui if they would like to? No. So that's why I continue to encourage people to, if they would, go to helpingmaui.org/offer if they'd like to participate. But we didn't have to pull the trigger on the moratorium because we did get enough people participating, through their own choice. Having said that, there's going to be some very serious legislation, and I want to give a special positive shout out to Lahaina Strong. They pushed very hard, appropriately, to bring more housing back into the market for local families, and that has to continue. Just because we made this small milestone does not mean we've solved the problem at all. And so I'm encouraging the legislature to actually pass the bills that they have in front of them. I think they're going to allow the counties to make some pretty aggressive moves to gradually phase out a lot of short-term rentals. For example, there's a decision called the Minatoia decision. That's over 2,000 housing units that are on Maui that got grandfathered in a long time ago. It's probably time to back away from that exemption and put those units back into circulation. Should do it in a civilized fashion so that people can gradually phase out whatever rentals they might have, kind of scheduled, but put those houses back into the population so our local families can rent. Lahaina Strong was right about that. They were right to push hard, and our team is in agreement. We want to see a lot of change on short-term rentals. But we're now 63% down from the peak. We peaked at 7,796 people in the hotels, and we're down, 63%. So that's great. I expect that over the course of the next couple months, we'll get everyone out to long-term rentals, and we continue to ask for short extensions on the the federal designation for coverage because we want to have enough time to move people safely. It's been a lot of work, and I'm so grateful to people for their patience.
I want to just expand a little more on this short-term rentals and what we're seeing and what you're seeing with this legislative review that's happening right now with lawmakers to decide about what this ultimately looks like. The decision to give the counties that authority, do you feel like that is the best mechanism rather than making an overall statewide policy? And why do you think it's more important to empower the counties to have these decision-making rather than creating one standard rule about short-term rentals for the entire state?
Well, that is what we have time for now, right? Which is to empower the counties so that through the course of 2024, they can ramp up really the enforcement of short-term rentals. There are so many that are illegal. We want to help empower them to kind of clean up their own communities. Now, I've also asked my Attorney General to, through the use of essentially a task force or a work group, to give a lot of additional support for enforcement. Right now, in some counties, there's criminal penalties. In other counties, they're just large fines. We want to get them to streamline some of that, but there is a value in home rule. And I've always, as a neighbor island guy, felt that there should be home rule because each of the counties are a little different. In the following session, though, in next year's legislative session, expect me and our administration to propose a bill that looks a lot like the New York legislation, where you have to essentially be present to be running a short-term rental. The proposal I will likely make is that someone has to be from the county. In other words, be present enough in case there was a tsunami, in case there is a natural disaster, in case there's a fire, that they can be there to support their property and whoever is renting in it. New York made you actually live kind of on the premises, like in the condominium tower. And I'll tell you, it was very effective in getting rid of short-term rentals. I don't mind local people owning short-term rentals. I think it can be a good business, but they're a lot more attuned to their community needs. People on the mainland, I'm not trying to be mean about this, but 52% of all short-term rentals are owned by mainlanders. They may not have any clue how damaging it is to their immediate street or community when they're taking a lot of property out of circulation. And so I think it should be a much more locally run operation. If someone wants to move here, I guess, and be present to run those businesses, that's their prerogative. But I think this would be a better local business. Remember, there are about 89,000 short-term rentals statewide, and only about 14,000 of them are fully licensed and appropriate. The other 75,000 are not really in compliance. And I'm hoping that those ones quickly decide to sell to the local community.
And if they don't, one of the ideas when you had a press conference recently and kind of floated this idea of the state essentially seizing property and forcing sale to a local resident. How would that actually work? Is that legal?
Well, the way it would be done, and the way it is done, is if, let's say, you have $100,000 of debt because you've racked up $10,000 a day of fines, or depending which county you're in, $1,000 of penalties and fines. When you do decide finally you're going to sell your land, sell your property to, in this case, hopefully a local family, that lien would be against it, and that property fine or fee would go to the state. In other words, we'd just be collecting. Some people will probably thumb their nose at us completely, thinking they're just going to get away with it, and they should think again, because it's property for local people that's on the line here. So we're going to be very serious about enforcement, especially on the illegal rental market, and especially for people that are unaware of the impact that they're having locally, like people who own 20 units and they're taking those out of circulation, and you can't find any housing, say, in Kailua, or, I mean, there's just a million different places, Waipahu. So I think it's time to get a lot stronger on this. And the nice thing about these law changes would be they would be very favorable to local families, and they would create just a lot of extra inventory without having to race to build, which is hard.
There still continues to be some questions over what all of this will cost, the price tag of the recovery efforts helping and supporting those who have been displaced. And we know that there are still negotiations that will have to exist with FEMA and the federal government about how much they're kicking in and how much the state is essentially responsible for. As the legislative process comes down to a close, there are some lawmakers who are concerned about how much money needs to be allocated for Maui and if there's enough money in the budget. The last time you were on here, you said that there's more than enough money. What kind of update can you provide us? Have you gotten any more figures, and do you still stand by your statement that there is enough funds?
Yeah, I have a lot more figures for you, and today's a pretty big day too, because I believe the Finance Committee is discussing this, and they should. I mean, that's their role, and it's a great role, an important role for them to have. Both Finance and Ways and Means Committees have to make sure our budget is sane. So, okay, the big picture is I brought $300 million back to our budget. We had planned for a $300 million extra deposit into the ERS, the retirement system account. That was an optional one, and I'm not doing it. So I'm putting that money towards today, towards people who are suffering now. Think of it in these terms. 2 houses are in your community. One is beautiful and set, and people are rich and they're living in it, and you have an option to give them an extra mortgage payment. You can do it or not do it, but they're all set. And then you got another house that is really struggling. Maybe a fire hit it. They need to rebuild. The people can barely live. Would you rather put money towards those guys and help them out, or towards the very stable, safe situation? Well, that's the circumstance I was in. So instead of putting $300 million down towards a an ERS payment that we have 30 to 50 years to deal with. I decided to invest in our people now so they can get mental health care, so that they can get maybe an extra housing development now, which will pay dividends. So that money was put back to the legislature. So that raised our carryover balance up to $985.7 million as of right now. Now, the legislature may appropriate some additional dollars for great programs. I hope that they will, to nonprofits, to some of the programs that are very necessary where people are suffering. But we, at this moment, would have $985.7 million carryover this year and $634.6 million next year. So we have more than enough resources to continue to really handle all of the state's problems. And that was one of the concerns, and it was an appropriate one, that were raised a couple months ago. Like, are we going to turn our backs on the rest of the state? No. We're going to care for those who are in peril, and that's Maui. And then we're going to continue on these other big plans. Now, since we last saw each other, I've crisscrossed the country and gone to Japan and worked on these things. And so I was able to pull back about $220 million of savings for us. We negotiated with the federal government in a positive way to get them to cover the cost of COFA migrants, Compact Free Association individuals. That saved us $30 million. We worked with FEMA to make sure that they will cover the cost of people staying in condos, which they don't normally do, but we had no choice here. That saved us $43 million. The debris clearance is going really well, so we expect to save $107 million there. And the Hawaii Community Foundation gave us $40 million to help with the Li'ili'i housing project. So if you add up all those numbers, that was $220 million right off the bat. Plus, I brought that $300 million back so that there could be no question that we can govern and we can care for our people. I wouldn't do all of that if we didn't have enough surplus. And also, remember, we have the rainy day fund still. The rainy day fund is untouched. It's $1.5 billion. We might want to touch on that later because I'm going to look at that money in an interesting way, I think, going forward. But the truth is we have enough resource. We have to keep going. We have to keep our economy rolling. I don't want to bring up a painful subject, but that is why on October 8th, I made sure that we reopened, because we couldn't afford to have a $500 million downturn. Imagine what we'd be talking about with these numbers if we did.
Well, that's quite a tease to say you're going to do something creative and interesting with the rainy day fund. So I want to ask you about that. Before I get to that, though, just putting a pin in the Airbnb conversation, or the vacation rental conversation, rather. You're saying that you would be okay then with people who live on property, because there are a number, in the figures that you laid out, a number of those folks who are doing vacation rentals have them on their property, and they are illegal. Are you okay with that type? Let's say someone's, has an Ohana unit on their house and they're doing that.
I would, if they just applied and their county leadership, their mayor or their county council approved them. That is why when we say that there should be some local control, that's okay. What I'm not okay with is these illegal ones that are governed from afar. People have no concept about the actual housing needs in their community or the community here in Hawaii, and they just kind of run them on just a cash basis. So there's a lot of things that have to change. There has to be much better regulation. But if you just take into consideration the ones that are illegal currently, and we got half of those back, just half of those 75,000, we would be sitting pretty, because with 37,500 additional units to rent to our local families, we'd be almost where we have to be. And we are actually revving up building. As controversial as it was, the Housing Emergency Proclamation, is finally getting some people to go and build houses and to apply for, all kind of, approvals. So we can do these things. Obviously I'm pushing really hard because some of these problems lingered for a bit. But I'm confident that we will have wins on short-term rentals over time. I think just the added enforcement, which we haven't done for almost ever, that alone will probably move a lot of people to a place where they say, you know what, I'd rather not run short-term rentals in Hawaii from New York. I'd rather run them elsewhere. And that's good. I want those, 3, 4, and 5 bedroom houses to go to big families.
Okay, let's get to that rainy day fund. We got to
Sure,
ask about that money. What do you have in mind?
So we got $1.5 billion there. It's been difficult to convince the legislature to do something new. So what I'm going to do is that money, I'm not going to touch the corpus of the rainy day fund. What I'm going to do is we're going to start a sub-account. So all the increases, the funds that grow from that $1.5 billion, it's about $60 million a year, we're going to just put that into a sub-account for the legislature to look at going forward. And I will encourage them to take the monies that we earn off of the $1.5 billion. I will encourage them to begin to use that going forward as our emergency funds for climate change. It's a good amount of money. We need to do it. Right now, what we're doing is we're scraping through every last opportunity we have with the Department of Transportation. We're having them do the work for kind of these fire breaks, these roads. We're going to DLNR, and we're asking them to be very creative with their resources to cull grasses and to put people into positions to do some of that work on our natural environment. But we should have dedicated funds, which is what I've been saying since long before the fire. And the legislature seems reluctant to do something like an impact fee. They seem reluctant to apply the $25 fee or to increase the TAT tax, all of which we need in this era of climate change. But since we have this $1.5 billion of rainy day fund, I think it's fair to say that the growth from that, just the regular growth, could safely be put towards this purpose. And that is a proposal I'll bring out next year. It's too soon or too near the end of the legislature to rattle them with a big new idea, although I think it could be done.
Again, so just for clarification, it's essentially the interest that is made off of the rainy day fund that you want to allocate into a sub fund for this. Have you floated this idea, or have you had this conversation at all with any other lawmakers thus far, and have maybe what has been their response initially?
I've talked to my team internally about it. This idea, kind of arose just from some time I had to think when I was traveling these last couple weeks. I've been looking for a large source of revenue that is a reliable generator of more revenue, and that's our largest single fund, the rainy day fund. So it could be done. Again, I wouldn't take anything from the corpus because really it's appropriate that you have to ask for a 2/3 vote of both the House and Senate to use that kind of savings. But I want them just to see that money. I also will make sure we commission some research on exactly how much it will grow, and we'll also present this as a kind of way to create a climate fund. There is a nice nexus there because that is the rainy day emergency fund, and then it would just be the juice, so to speak, off of it. So I like the idea. It would negate the need for a new tax, and frankly, I've been careful because they've asked me to be careful with that rainy day fund to keep it there intact because it helps with our bonding rate. Now, I did want to share with you that when you count the rainy day fund plus our hurricane relief fund plus the carryover balance, we have a lot of money left in the coffers. Right now, our carryover balance for 2023 with all those extra funds was 32.5%, which is a lot of money. At the end of 2024 this year, which ends on June 30th, we will have 26.18% still in reserve, and we would still have 22.75% resources in reserve at the end of 2025, even if you did all of these things. So, there's a reason to save for the future, and then there's also a time to spend when your state's in crisis. And I think the people on Maui feel that we're in crisis, and I think a lot of our citizens who have been struggling are sensing crisis, and perhaps we'll get to talk about that later in our show. I would rather be spending some of this money on social workers, on homeless housing, on actual housing projects, rather than waiting till 2050 and just celebrating, of course we have a great bond rating, celebrating that we carry over billions of dollars while a generation of people can barely afford to live here.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are in crisis financially across the board. This is an interesting idea. It sort of reminds me of like a university endowment, right? That they have, billions of dollars in some cases, and they use that interest to fund initiatives on campus. I'm interested to know what you think, how you would get that money specifically allocated just for climate. Who controls that cash at the end of the day? That's the legislator's priority, or would it be a special fund for the governor?
No, it would be the legislators. I'm not. I don't want to be silly about this. I know that they feel the need to control appropriations, and that's good, except when we're in a terrible emergency. In this case, right now, that money goes to the general fund, and we've had a significant rainy day fund for quite some time. I mean, it was already $1 billion before I got in. We've added $500 million. So that money has been churning and generating a lot of revenue, and it goes to the general fund, and that's what these carryover balances are. It's monies from investments and interest and so on. Look, it's time to take on the large problems of our state, and I hope that people feel we're doing a pretty good job at it, but it is somewhat constrained by how much money you have to invest. And we still have to do a lot more on housing. We all know that we're pressing hard on homelessness. We have so many people that can't find a nurse or a doctor for mental health care needs. So we're chipping away at those problems, like when we did the HELP program, right? It was a great appropriation the legislature made, which was $10 million in year one, $20 million in year two, to repay the debts of nurses and social workers and doctors. We already did those 485 scholarships. But if I have extra resources, I can accelerate that problem solution and get us to, a full complement of healthcare providers faster. We're going to do 1,000 scholarships this August, just to give you an idea, with that $20 million. And a lot of them are like kids and nephews and nieces of people that we talk to all the time. So I think we solve problems and invest in people now to do better as a state, rather than hoard money, which was going on in years past. That's not going to really help us. We have enough money in savings and reserve for crises. We have enough money to keep our bond ratings very high, but we have not spent enough money on people's kind of core needs.
We have a lot to get through, and I know we're spending a lot of time on Maui, but just wanted to get a quick update before we move on about the One Ohana Fund that was launched about a month ago. If you can give us an update on how many people have expressed interest in this and have already begun that process of signing up.
Yes, thank you. So 62 direct inquiries have come in. There were 102 individuals that we lost. That number did go up one a couple days ago. An individual passed after a long struggle and fight after the fire raged through. 29 have applied directly to date, and we'll see what the other 33 decide to do. I'm going to personally be meeting with people on Maui. We are sending someone over to Nevada to talk to some of the families that have moved over to Vegas, even though they lost a loved one in the fire, to talk to them. I think and hope that this is going to be a program that works for a lot of people, but again, like I said before, it's completely optional, whatever's best in people's lives. The only thing I would say is do not spend much money on the settlement and giving it to mainland attorneys. Use local attorneys, let them navigate your needs. If you're in litigation, make sure that money stays with you if you've lost a loved one. The goal here, like I said earlier, was to get 1.5. It is $1.5 million for anyone who lost a loved one, and it will happen right away. Any monies that aren't spent by June 30th will go back to the general fund, and that'll be it. And then I guess it will be litigation and time. But I don't want people to wait 3 or 4 years and then spend 40% on their attorneys. So, they would need to have a very, very large legal settlement or resolution to do better than this. I just want them to be okay to the best of our ability. So I'm going to keep doing that all the way through the end of April, and I'll decide within about 5 days of the end of April whether or not we need another 2 or 4 weeks. But for now, just expect this to essentially come to a close at the end of this month. And again, hopefully people will find some modicum of healing through this. We're going to head into the next phase, which is going to be much larger, and that's the settlements for individuals who lost property, whose businesses, burned down. That's going to be several $1 billion, and I am working on that. But I first wanted to focus on the loss of life.
I want to go back to that $60 million, this idea of using that rainy day interest fund, if you will. Interesting, of course, that it adds up to $60 million. This is what you were hoping that $25 check-in fee would be to impact the climate. Yes. That's not making its way through the legislature. Second time now, the so-called green fee is not making its way. What are your thoughts on the fact that lawmakers don't have agreement with you on this allocation of money?
People are of their own minds, but I think everybody across the state realizes that we should be investing more money in protection for our communities. It would be one thing if we were suddenly appropriating a lot of extra resources to DLNR and protecting us from fires and whatnot. We're not necessarily seeing that yet. Hopefully the final budget will be a reflection of these needs. But I'm telling everyone now that in the 5 and 10 and 20 years to come, this is going to be a central part of what governments do, which is insure themselves against natural disasters and invest in prevention. Maybe I'm a bit ahead of my time on this one. We were considered ahead of our time when we decided that housing was healthcare, and look what's happening now. All across the country, people are now seeking Medicaid dollars to pay for housing in their states. They are building these villages like we said they should do to mitigate the negative impact and the suffering that people have in advance. So sometimes ideas, like I said, are ahead of their time. This one is really important, though, because we've actually now seen what can happen. And I'll just keep pushing, but it might just be that they didn't want to have a new tax or a new fee. There's always a pretty strong reluctance to do that. I was a legislator for 14 years. Nobody likes to cast a vote to raise taxes or fees, although this was on visitors. So, kind of give me a break, right? But at the end of the day, if it's better that we take money from, say, this investment portfolio that we have from the rainy day fund, hey, that's okay too. I just want the resource in place to protect our communities.
Well, while the green fee itself and this check-in fee may not have passed, one of the things that we have heard from tourism officials and other lawmakers of initiative that they are in support of is really to build up these site-specific fees for areas that we see in Diamond Head and other locations around the state that charge a fee for those visitors to attend. Is that something that you could see the state pursuing more? And what would that model look like if there were to be an expansion of this already established program?
It's a lot clunkier and harder to kind of manage. I'm not sure if people are aware, but I believe we're already paying $25 per person to go to, what is it? Jamie and I were just talking about it a few minutes before I came on, that extraordinary dive spot that we have here on Oahu. Forgive me, it'll come to me in a second. But sooner or later, it's just not going to be that helpful. It also has a problem, which is when you have those site-specific fees, you have to invest the money in those sites. So yes, we'll be able to protect certain hiking areas and we'll be able to protect certain beautiful landmarks, which is important. But I'm talking about things that are much larger than that. I'm talking about protecting our ability to actually get insurance for our houses, protecting our ability to create resources in case we have a disaster that costs $1 billion or $2 billion. So it would be nice to have some of that, these destination sites, but it won't actually do what we need to do. The legislature is going to pass a bill, and it's similar to what we had talked about last year. They are going to pass a bill this year, apparently, to take monies from the Hurricane Relief Fund and put that towards a special insurance fund to subsidize people's homeowners insurance. Because right now, homeowners insurance is going through the roof, and if we allow it to get too high, people will not even be able to sell their condos, move, the values will drop, and so on. So they're going to do that. So mine is just one step further, which is protecting entire communities. I really think we should do it. I hesitate to imagine that they're not passing a bill just because I'm pushing it. There always is that dynamic between the executive branch and the legislative branch, but we need this kind of thing. And so I'm giving multiple options, just to do it. So that money will be there. It won't be spent. It'll be kept safely in an account, and then hopefully they will scoop it and put it into this climate impact fee program next year.
I want to go to break in just a moment, but I do want to squeeze in one question before we do that from a viewer who's writing in. Marie's asking, why is he taking so many trips? Why is he going to the mainland? Why is he going to Japan? You laid out why you went to the continent, but tell us a little bit about your Japan trip before we go to break.
Okay, so you guys want me to stay home and lay on the couch, or do you want me to go out and get major appropriations for us? The trip to Washington was worth $220 million in savings for our state. The trip to Japan, what's this guy's name? Marie, you can come with me the next time, man, and see how hard I had to work. We're trying to get 1,000 houses brought to Maui. Also, I'm working on a major energy deal so our energy system doesn't collapse. And that's the reason for travel, and that's the reason that I work hard. I would love to not have to be away from home, but this job, if it's done right, has a lot of responsibilities to also bring Japanese tourism back. Japanese tourism, I think this individual probably isn't aware of, represented historically 30% of all of our revenue. If we turn our back on that, for instance, we're working on this open corridor of travel between Japan and Hawaii. If we turn our back on that, you could say goodbye to budgets for our schools, for our hospitals, for all of the things that we hold dear. So governors need to go and get those things done, and I'll keep doing it.
Okay, we're going to go to break. We'll be right back after this. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Welcome back to Spotlight Now. Joining us, of course, once again, is Governor Josh Green. We spent the first half of our show really focusing in on what's happening over there on Maui, but we want to move on to some other issues that are happening on the state. Right now, also just talking about what's happening at the legislature. Right now, it looks to seem as though the Hawaii Tourism Authority, which in the past has been somewhat on the bubble in terms of their future and overall funding for this organization moving forward. It seems to look like they will have support within the state budget to move forward as an organization. Wanted to get your thoughts about the importance of this entity and just the direction in which it's going and its importance, if you believe that it is something that the legislature should support and fund.
Yeah, I'm glad and grateful that the legislature is supporting that. You know, the strategy there was give them some new people, some new blood that had a lot of experience, and let them trust that, love them or hate them, they would get good results. And I'm speaking right now of someone who I hold very dear, and that's Mufi Hahnemann. So Mufi has an incredible amount of experience running the Hawaii Lodging and Tourism Authority, and of course was our mayor here in Honolulu. So he knows what he's doing, and I told the team over at HTA, look, you guys got to get along with the legislature. And by the way, I should give a shout out to Jimmy Tokioka, Jimmy came in and really stabilized DBED at a time when there was a lot of kind of infighting. There was a lot of questionable decisions that had been made, resulting in delay in the stadium, resulting in a delay in the contracts on tourism, both management and marketing. And I just said, look, be straight with your colleagues, Jimmy. Let's get these things done just as projects, and he did. So look, Jimmy sailed through confirmation. Mufi's, fine, and it seems like we put that fire out. Also, remember, tourism, not only is it our lifeblood, but it is evolving, and it has to evolve. We had too many people coming here before COVID. It was really bumming people out, and we had to make a change, so we're making that change in real time. One of the challenges, of course, is there is also the change away from Japanese tourism because of the yen. The yen is very weak. It was trading at 151 yen to the dollar recently, which is the lowest in like 38 years. And that makes it really difficult to get Japanese travelers to Hawaii. I'm doing what I can, Marie, to get Japanese travelers back here because that pays for our public schools, but it is going to be difficult.
Daryl Huff just texted me. He said within the hour that the House just killed the cannabis legislation. So just a quick hot take on the lawmakers deciding that recreational marijuana is not going to go through this term.
That really ends up being their prerogative. I do have a possible solution on this matter, which I will share with you right now. I hadn't anticipated that. A lot of people do want recreational marijuana. A lot of law enforcement folks feel it's a big danger. I think probably there is a place to find a more happy medium, and that is to expand people's capacity to get medical marijuana under any circumstance that they deem necessary with their physician. The underpinnings of this idea are, for women's reproductive rights, we in Hawaii, and I think it's really the right thing to do, have been adamant that women be able to make their own decisions about their bodies with their healthcare provider. We in Hawaii have made that decision from the death with dignity standpoint. If a person is suffering and they choose to end their life because they're within 6 months of the end and they would prefer to have death with dignity rather than suffer in pain, they make that decision with their healthcare provider. And I think we could apply that same principle to the medical use of marijuana, which would significantly expand people's legal use of marijuana, but would still leave regulation in place regarding children, which has been one of the concerns, because it would have to be still at least authorized by a doctor. You'd probably see a doubling of medical marijuana use, but it would be legal and safe. I have shared that idea with people in case the bill died. I might be able to do that through rulemaking, which I think would be fairly okay with the law enforcement community. I have talked to them about it. Again, this is news to me because I was just here with you during this session when they made their votes. But I think that we should trust adults, but be mindful of the collateral concerns we have with marijuana, and that's probably why they still aren't there.
And so just to clarify, that would be just a rule change that would happen within the Department of Health and those overall regulations that the department and the head would just have to adjust to accommodate more leniency with the medical marijuana laws.
Yes, and I did check. I do believe we have that capacity. Right now, you see, somewhere upwards of, I think it was, at one point it was 13,000 individuals got medical marijuana licenses. That number did increase over the last few years, and it would increase significantly for people who are suffering chronic pain, nausea, PTSD, any disease state that they felt that they wanted to discuss with their physician or nurse practitioner. So I have been preparing for that kind of compromise, but I haven't waded in with this as an idea because I didn't want to disrupt the dynamic at the legislature. See how sensitive and careful I am?
Well, I'm interested because I'm not familiar with the current protocol. So are there a specific list right now of conditions, let's say cancer, HIV, what have you, that are limited, that limit you in terms of the medical authorization? This would just make it whatever you and your physician deem appropriate.
Correct. That's exactly right. And also what it does is it kind of throws a wet blanket over it because a lot of people are reluctant to share any of their history, their medical history, or to be judged. And so that's something that we have to be very careful of. We have seen in many different disease states people not wanting to get health care because they were afraid that they were going to be judged by society. That was the case with HIV for a long time. It's been the case with mental illness for a very long time, and any kind of drug consumption, because some people still judge individuals who use medical marijuana under any circumstance. But look, if it's done carefully with your healthcare provider, I have certainly no problems with it. It is a big social discussion that has to go on in society. Hawaii's led the way on women's reproductive rights. It's led the way on gay marriage, and it's probably been more conservative on marijuana issues, which is something for you guys to discuss. I don't know that there's a clear reason why, but there are a couple states like Hawaii and Utah which have been very careful about drugs. We're careful about other drugs, and I don't want to confuse this issue, but in Hawaii we've been very careful about opioids. We have the lowest prescription rate of opioids in the country, and that meant we had less opioids in general floating through society, of which about 50% usually are consumed by children. So there's been some benefit to being conservative in some of these areas.
One of the other things, going back to tourism, we had Movie Hanneman and Jeff Wagner here last week, and we talked about some of the challenges that present itself, especially with tourist zones, specifically with Waikiki. And one of the conversations led to what's happening in Waikiki with the overall beach erosion and the replenishment act that that they're trying to take place to help, especially on the Ewa side of Waikiki Beach, to bring some of that sand back. What has the conversation been like with you and especially with DLNR when it comes to some of the growings that may be needed in this area, recognizing the significance and importance of Waikiki overall? What do you recommend or propose in order for this to continue to be a tourist destination that has a beach that people can enjoy?
Well, I totally support beach replenishment in Waikiki and in key places across the state where a lot of travelers come specifically for that purpose. I will say this: anywhere there is a groin already that can be repaired, they should repair it. I think it's fair to do that. I think a lot of people bought their land based on that assumption that they'd be allowed to care for their beach and the land right there, and I think we've been okay environmentally. As to adding new groins, that really does have to go through the process because the DLNR guys are more expert at it than I. I have asked the DLNR director to authorize 3-year extensions where there is dispute till they can get the adequate studies done, because I don't think it's ever fair to pull the rug out from under somebody when they've already invested or made plans for their businesses or for travel. We rely so much on travel that it's not fair for us to turn our backs on it without a long-term plan, because we have to give ourselves the opportunity to replace those revenues to care for our people. And so I'm very cautious about just letting a beach go away or neglecting a problem like we're seeing in Waikiki. We have to have Waikiki for the good of our economy.
Okay. I want to go back to something that you kind of referenced at the top, and this is that a lot of people are having a lot of pain right now, just in our community. We have the trauma of the Maui wildfires, of course, and more recently in our community, we've seen a rash of violent crimes. I'm thinking about the Maryknoll teacher who was attacked, the Chinese language teacher, and of course this incident in Manoa with the family that was killed. I don't really know what the question is, but I think that a lot of families are hurting right now, and so I'm interested just to get your reaction to what happened there and sort of more broadly, just about all this trauma in our community.
Yes. So I'm so glad that you brought this up, Yunji. So what we have to do, in my opinion, is we have to truly look into our hearts and decide whether we're going to protect people who are vulnerable and support them, or if we're going to make them fight it out on their own out there. And I don't think that's who we are, letting people just fight it out on their own. Since I became governor, a few moments have stood out to me that were just heartbreaking. The young woman who was shot in the head from afar. It was just kind of a gang dispute between, I think, her boyfriend and another gang. Then, of course, this individual that committed this heinous crime against the Chinese woman who is a teacher. And we have visited her a couple times. She is a beautiful person. She is healing, but she will never be the same. She's suffering. And then this Manoa family, which we believe the act of violence committed by the father, the murder of the 3 children and his wife and then himself, the suicide, was a result of economic despair. There had to be some underlying mental illness too, because people don't just do that. But all of these things seem like they come from people in desperate straits, and we have to decrease that desperation. So a lot of times we talk about policies and laws, and I don't view them as just words on a paper. I view them as ways to make sure we give people a better chance to live in Hawaii, to stay in Hawaii, to support the people they love. It's why we're trying to decrease the cost of living on people that are living on the edge, because maybe if we do that, they won't feel desperate and hurt themselves. Maybe they won't feel desperate and have to leave the state. There's still going to be some sickness in society, which means we have to do our best to treat it. We have hundreds of millions of dollars that are necessary to provide mental health care for people. We can't have people on the street suffering trauma. So we have to solve those problems. And to the point earlier that Ryan, you raised about, you kind of suggest, am I pissed off that some of these bills die and things don't happen? I am, not because I need bills to pass, but it's because I've watched for years, first as a doctor and then a legislator and then finally as governor, I've watched for years people suffer. And I see most of the suffering because I keep my eyes open and I talk to thousands of people, and it's just an honor to get to observe all of our state. And when I see that much suffering, I think people deserve a little bit more help. And there's enough wealth here to do it. There are enough empty buildings to make available to people. If we do a good job, there'll be enough healthcare providers to care for people in desperate moments. So that's my belief. I don't know if we could have stopped that terrible, terrible moment. I will tell you that I'm so proud of the 3 schools when they came together for the vigil the other day. My daughter is 1 year younger than the oldest child that was killed, and a lot of them knew each other. We kind of all know each other in Hawaii. And I will tell you, I think that event is going to resonate for years to come in our state. I think that we're still in a little bit of a state of shock. And what we owe to society is to give everybody a little bit of a break. So if you want to know how I govern, that $300 million I was talking about, that $300 million was a direct result of watching that tragedy occur and wondering if we had only made more services available to that man and we had only made it a little bit easier to live in Hawaii, if that kind of thing could have been avoided. And I don't know, but I will tell you that a lot of people reach out to me and tell me that they're on the edge. And I think what our goal should be in government and in leadership positions and in media is to shine a light on the tough times and then solve the problems. We're going to continue to reach out to people. And for those who are listening today, if you're having a tough time, if you're really struggling with depression, call 211. Get some help. We're going to keep augmenting that service. If you can't find a doctor, stop in at the ER. We'll find you one. If you are having trouble with housing, let us do all that we can to make it a little bit easier to build housing in the state. You guys see me get pretty mad sometimes when, we don't work towards solutions. It's because I don't think enough people are looking at the big picture. I understand that there are groups out there that have a very different ideology than I may about maybe conservation or environmentalism or what have you. Look, I love the environment, but I also love people very deeply, and I want them to have a chance to find a house and build a house in Hawaii. And sometimes I think we let our ideologies and politics get in the way of solutions. So I want to see solutions, and it's kind of why you're seeing executive actions a lot and emergency orders, and it's kind of why I'm going to keep pushing hard for some of these global solutions to help our people.
You know, I want to ask too, just on that line of leadership as you navigate through this time in your first term. I mean, you are a handful of leaders who have ascended to the role of governor of the state of Hawaii, coming from your experience having worked with the legislature. At times we have seen just what happens between former lawmakers that now find their way to the fifth floor and share the same concerns that you are sharing, right? Some of the frustrations that you see, that you want action. And then the legislative process takes place. Everybody has an opinion. Sometimes it gets lost in the noise, and we see bills dying. We see there's disputes that are happening and issues that are raised, and it to the frustration of many in the public, where they just see politics happening at the Capitol again. As a leader, and now as someone who wants to make those changes, how do you navigate through that, trying to convince colleagues of your reasoning, and what happens when they have resistance against you? I mean, it's got to be frustrating at times to try to convince people why these things should be happening.
Well, it's evident I won't be able to smoke pot to mellow out.
Well, you can have a conversation with your
Yes.
doctor, apparently, and
Yes.
perhaps so.
No, really, it is difficult. The legislative process is critically important to try to get consensus built, and then there are emergencies, and it really depends on how you view emergencies. You know, some are obvious, like the fire, the recent disaster in Maryland where a barge hit a bridge, and you know, my heart goes out to Westmore, who's a dear friend and governor over there, to rebuild. So those are the clear lines, and then there's this giant gray in the middle. I'm a communicator, and I found that a lot of people respond to communication, and then it takes a little time, and then we end up passing laws. I would say 8 or 10 years ago, there was no way on earth anyone thought that we would translate housing as healthcare to actual policy with Kauhale and Medicaid dollars for housing, and here it is. And people can see the benefit now. It may take a little time. I mean, I have finite time as governor, of course, 4 years, 8 years if I'm lucky, but I'm also trying to do something that is abstractly called moving the Overton window, which is moving what looks normal through a window glass. And what's normal, in my mind, might not yet be normal for other people. It's normal to care for homeless individuals so that they don't suffer on the street, so that they don't go to the hospital, so that they get better in our house. That's normal for me. For other people, it's not normal to spend healthcare dollars on homeless individuals, or it wasn't. And that may very well be the case as we go forward on this climate impact fee. What looks normal to me, to put some prevention in there based on travelers who are having a big impact, may not yet feel normal to the legislature. And that's okay, because democracy is built to not lurch too much. When it does, I think it becomes disconcerting. But you guys asked some very interesting questions today about the suffering that's gone on in society and what can be done. All I can tell you is there are very good people out there that want to help, and it's not all about laws. It's not all about appropriations. A lot of it is about us finding a common purpose in our state. And if we find that common purpose, you will see us really thrive. If we are disjointed and separated and fighting, we will waste resources, we will waste time, we won't move forward. So probably the most important thing that I will do over these couple years is find a peace between parts of the community that have been at odds. Maybe some of the Hawaiian community has been feeling very distressed and disrespected for decades. I'm trying to heal that wound so we all move forward together. I'm trying to address the reality that there are going to be some travelers and people living here with us, but that they won't change our culture. If we have a common purpose for the good of our Ohana, you know, the rest of the differences will settle themselves. I'm trying to bring a lot of the legislators along. About 2/3 of the legislators seem to have a very similar ideology that I have, but there are some that don't. And I guess I just have to keep trying to convince them.
You know, that window that you're talking about, in some ways it feels like it's moving in the wrong direction in terms of what's considered normal in Hawaii. I feel like, you know, the level of violent crime that we're seeing in our community, and I know this is really more of a county issue of enforcement of HPD and what have you, and, you know, depending on what county you live in. But is, you know, the amount of gun crimes that we seem to be having, these violent incidents that we just talked about, is there more that the state could do? Are you thinking about more gun buybacks, or are there other ways to address this from a state level to try to come at this issue?
Yes, I am. I'm glad you asked that. So yes, I've asked our guys to do quarterly gun buybacks. Our legislature's done a great job with overall gun laws. I think what we are seeing is humanity has been struggling. It's been wrestling with its own demons. Far too many people are feeling desperate, and therefore they take drugs which may be laced with fentanyl, and then they become addicted. Those are the kind of violent, those are the activating forces behind violence. Most of the violence that we see is related to methamphetamine. And when I say violence, I mean also theft and violence. And in some cases, it's an uphill battle because humanity was able to tolerate a lot of self-harm for a long time. There was alcohol or other things. But in that generation gone by, they didn't have the threats of major opioids and meth and social media, which distances people from normal communication. And I think that when you see social media and when you see kind of the normalization of violence on different, you know, any number of different platforms, whether it's now, I'm sure a lot of people are going to get up in arms when I say this, but when it's easy to watch games where people are blowing away a lot of people, and it's easy to watch on the internet the actual violence that was just carried out minutes ago, it numbs people to it. I could tell you, if you ever spent a shift in the ER with me, especially when I was working in the urban areas back on the mainland, and you see a large amount of flesh torn off of someone's bone from a major weapon, no one would allow their families or friends to be near guns. But because it's such an abstraction now and it's so common and normal in these other settings, I think that humanity is slipping a little bit. And we should be careful. We should probably take a lesson from some of the societies that damp down kids' access to violent games, to, you know, violent imagery on the internet. I'm very proud of schools that prevent the use of devices during the school day. And then the rest of the time, we hope that the parents are doing a great job, you know, keeping the kids away from it. We have to do those things, or else we're going to feel like it's normal. So we all are going to have to do our part. We got a lot of leaders in society. I mean, I'm one of them, kind of, you know, but we have teachers that are leaders, and we've got media that are leaders, and we got firefighters, and every parent is a leader in their own right if they do a good job. So that's what we have to do. And I think that Hawaii is special because we have the capacity to do some of the beautiful things and avoid a lot of the terrible things. We don't have inner city violence like they do. We have the beaches. We have calm places. We have a lot of spiritual centers. We should emphasize those.
All right, we only have about a minute left, and this was a pretty heavy way to end it. So I want to end it on a little more lighter note. So I'm going to ask you some just really rapid-fire questions just to kind of get another sense on the different side of the governor. You're in the Final Four. Who do you got winning the Final Four?
Okay, so I've got Connecticut winning it, but I'm rooting for NC State.
Okay, good answer. Oh, Mary Monarch, are you going this year?
Yes, but I'm not dancing.
Okay. Here's a question. The State Board of Geographic Names is reconsidering the name of Hawaii Island. Do you think we need a different name for Hawaii Island?
No.
Final question. What are you binge watching right now? Anything?
Yeah, I've been binge watching Shogun, actually,
nice.
and it's pretty awesome. So, yeah, thank you for the light question.
Yeah. And on a lighter note.
Yeah, I'm sorry to sound
No,
heavy.
that was
you know,
great.
there's a lot of stuff out there, and you know, I really am proud of people for hanging in there.
We appreciate your time. Have a safe trip to Hilo. We'll see you back here next month. Stay with us. Spotlight Now continues right after this.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great to hear from the governor there. We covered a bunch of issues. Encourage all of you to go back and watch some of the headlines that were made today.
Yeah, really interesting, I think, on medical marijuana or the recreational marijuana, that bill dying while we were on the air live, and we asked the governor his quick take. He wants to do this legislative, or basically through executive order, changing the law so that it would be much looser to get that medical marijuana permit.
That's right. And we also got more updates on Maui and some of the efforts that are going there, some updated numbers, as well as his plan for essentially using some of the interest made off of the rainy day fund to really help push his climate change. So a lot of that is happening. We leave you now. All eyes on Hilo as the Merry Monarch just a few days away. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you right here next week for Spotlight Now.
Aloha.